What if I told you that there are 7 messages from Medjugorje that have never reached the world and that, if true, could change the way you view signs, family protection, and the times we live in? Have you ever experienced something that seemed like a sign and didn't know what to do? Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover may surprise you and perhaps spark a restlessness you didn't even know you had. Since the first apparitions in Medjugorje, people everywhere have felt something profound, inexplicable peace, tears that healed sorrows, lights in the sky that seemed to whisper hope. At the same time, rumors and reports have emerged about messages that, for reasons no one can fully confirm, have never been made public. They call them the 7 unrevealed messages of Medjugorje, words that, according to some testimonies, contain an urgent call to repentance, instructions to protect families, signs that would occur in heaven, and a promise that would change the fate of many. Does this sound like fiction? Perhaps. But for those who were there, for those who swore they felt a spiritual touch or saw something inexplicable in the sky, these stories carry weight and we cannot simply sweep them under the rug. By discussing these messages, I don't want to spread panic or fuel conspiracy theories. I want to open an honest conversation about discernment, faith, and responsibility. Because when words are withheld, when a warning goes silent, the vacuum fills with fear or misinterpretation. And that's where spiritual discernment becomes essential. Learning to distinguish what edifies from what confuses. What brings us closer to love from what separates us. What is an authentic sign from what is manipulation? Have you ever had an experience where you weren't sure if it was a sign or just a coincidence? Share it in the comments below. I read everything. The truth is that these stories about Medjugorje touch a deep chord in many of us. The search for family protection, for meaning in the face of the inexplicable, for practical instructions when the world seems unsafe. When we hear about public signs or proposals for spiritual preparation, the natural reaction ranges from curiosity, skepticism, and even a desperate desire to know what lies ahead. And precisely for this reason, it's important to examine these accounts carefully, analyzing who told them, what the fruits of these messages are, whether they promote love and charity, or whether they generate division. As we explore this mystery, I want you to keep something in mind. Spirituality is not a spectacle. It is a life-changing journey. Apparitions and messages, real or not, always point to a call, often to conversion, often to reconciliation. And when a warning is kept silent, a bigger question arises. What is the purpose of this secrecy? Institutional prudence, protection, or something the community is not yet ready to hear? These are questions we will examine honestly, without sensationalism. Now, imagine for a moment that one of these messages spoke directly to your home, your work, your family. Imagine simple, practical instructions that could help protect those you love, a gesture of prayer, a blessing ritual, guidance to live with greater spiritual vigilance. The effect wouldn't just be emotional. It could be practical, shaping decisions and attitudes. What if part of the listener's responsibility is simply to be attentive and act with love? Without concluding the subject, I'll take you on a journey that combines testimonies, the historical context of Medjugorje, analyses of institutional silence, and, above all, practical criteria for discernment. Stay with me, because now we'll delve into the stories, separate the possible from the probable, and understand how these 7 unrevealed messages can truly touch your life, or at least make us look at the present with new eyes. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below with what touched you most. Whether you've experienced something similar, or if you have a question we need to explore together, your experience can illuminate others who are also seeking answers. It's not just a gesture. Each comment reveals real stories, creates connection, and helps build a map of signs and testimonies worth listening to. If you found this conversation important, like the video. This simple sign shows we're on the right track and empowers me to bring you more research, interviews, and stories that truly matter. And if you want to follow the next part of this investigation, where I'll delve into the most impactful stories and analyze these potential warning signs one by one, subscribe to the channel. Your subscription helps the channel reach those who need to hear this message now, and allows me to invest time in verifying sources, speaking with witnesses, and producing content responsibly. Here, your participation isn't just about numbers, it's about supporting stories so they can be heard carefully, so we can separate what's edifying from what's confusing, and so this debate can grow with respect and truth. So write in the comments, I want to know more, I saw something, or share a sign you remember. I read each message and often share the most powerful stories in future videos. Hold on to that curiosity, because there's still much to discover. Now, let's move on and dive into the first group of messages. Those that speak of warning and repentance and what they mean for us today. Medjugorje is one of those places that carries an almost palpable mystery, a lost spot in the Balkans that suddenly became the center of attention of the spiritual world. Imagine a small village in the former Yugoslavia in the 1980s, still marked by political tensions and a simple life of farmers and shepherds. It was there, amidst a harsh and silent reality, that a group of young people began claiming to see the Virgin Mary and receive messages from her. These apparitions were not restricted to the intimate circle of these families. Soon, curious onlookers, pilgrims, and even journalists began arriving to see what was happening firsthand. Suddenly, that village became a place of encounters, tears, and prayers, and many began to call it the confessional of the world. The power of Medjugorje lies not only in its extraordinary nature, but also in the impact these experiences had on ordinary people. At a time when war was looming, the messages spoke of conversion, reconciliation, and prayer for peace. This influenced people's mindsets and concrete decisions. Many say these messages helped them forgive enemies, prepare for times of trial, and see meaning in suffering. It is this blend of spiritual revelation and social impact that makes the phenomenon so fascinating. It is not just a story about the supernatural, it is also a story of human transformation, about the power of a word, coming from silence, to change the course of a life. If you look at the archival footage, you'll see something simple: stone hills, a central church, pilgrims kneeling on the ground. But behind this simplicity lies a mystery that still captivates scholars, religious believers, and skeptics alike. What happened there to attract millions of people over the decades? What is so powerful about these messages that they move people from all over the world to leave their homes and seek answers in such a distant place? Some say it's simply popular faith. Others see a clear sign that something greater is at work, something demanding attention. This contrast is part of the journey, and it's precisely what keeps the flame of curiosity and devotion alive. Behind the scenes of this phenomenon, there's also a delicate plot: the relationship with ecclesiastical authorities, investigations to validate the testimonies, the effort to filter out exaggerations and maintain sobriety. Official silence surrounding certain messages isn't an easy obstacle to overcome. It raises questions, encourages theories, and further fuels the desire to uncover what's hidden. And this is where the value of carefully analyzing everything comes in, seeking not only to satisfy curiosity but also to understand the real impact these messages have on the lives of those who receive them. When you look at the map of the region and understand the historical context, everything becomes even more significant. It wasn't just a beautiful place where the supernatural could manifest. It was a land in conflict, with tense borders and divided families. Receiving messages that spoke of peace and reconciliation in that setting was almost an urgent call to change the collective mindset. This is an important detail. The apparitions don't appear in a vacuum. They speak to concrete reality, to the suffering of a people, to the decisions that need to be made in the present. And this explains why these messages attract global attention to this day, because the search for meaning and hope isn't exclusive to the residents of a village. It's a universal need. It's fascinating to see how Medjugorje has become a meeting place for stories. On one side, people who went there in search of a miracle and left transformed. On the other, scholars and journalists trying to find rational answers to what they saw. And in the midst of it all, a constant call to prayer, to fasting, to life change. This mix creates a healthy tension between faith and reason, between mystery and evidence, between silence and revelation. Every pilgrim who climbs Mount Podbrud or Križevak carries not only prayers, but also the weight of their own doubts and the desire to find direction. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, because understanding Medjugorje isn't just about looking to the past or the landscapes of that village. It's about delving into the power of these messages, the way they challenge our mindset, and make us reflect on personal and collective decisions. It's about asking ourselves if these apparitions are a warning for the future, a call to live differently today, or a mirror that reveals what needs to be transformed within us. Each account carries with it a hidden truth, a layer of meaning that isn't immediately revealed, but that unfolds as we open ourselves to listen carefully. And it's in this listening that great transformations begins. Profound, often uncomfortable, but always charged with the potential to change destinies. Write it down. I'm on this journey too. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And this is where the enigma becomes truly intriguing, according to reports and theories circulating among pilgrims, researchers, and witnesses. There were 7 messages that, for some reason, never reached the general public. 7 warnings or teachings that were kept behind the scenes, discussed in whispers, filled with reverence or fear. I'm not claiming this is absolute truth. I'm presenting what various sources and narratives point to as plausible possibilities within this journey of investigation. These hypotheses, when placed side by side, form a mosaic that blends attitude, transformation, and responsibility, and each piece of this mosaic directly touches our mindset, our decisions, and the impact we choose to allow in our lives, and the lives of those we love. Among the most recurring theories are, without definitive tone, an urgent warning that would call for deep repentance, an intensive call to prayer and fasting as practical tools of protection, the promise of public tests of faith, signs in heaven or on earth that would be perceived by multitudes. specific guidelines for family protection, rituals, or simple practices that could preserve homes in times of crisis. The prediction of a time of trial, a period in which collective choices would be decisive. Instructions on how to interpret signs to avoid falling into traps of fear. And, finally, a final promise, something like a word of comfort addressed to the faithful who persevere. Each of these themes appears in the conversations as a possibility, as a suggestion of content that, by its nature, would require institutional and pastoral care before being publicly disclosed. And for this reason, perhaps, it remains silent, not necessarily out of malice, but out of prudence, the need for verification, the protection of vulnerable people, or even fear of the inflammatory effect such words can have when interpreted out of context. When considering these theories, it's important to maintain a posture that combines curiosity and discernment. Hidden truth, when it exists, is not an invitation to panic, but a call to conscious decisions. It's not a shortcut to sensationalism, but a stimulus to personal and community transformation. Thinking about potential warnings also means considering how a community's mindset might evolve when faced with the unexpected. Will there be more collective prayer, more search for reconciliation, or will there be rupture and fear? The impact depends on how the message is received and the actions it inspires. If the message fosters love, charity, and responsibility, it bears fruit that changes realities. If it foments division, it promises concrete risks. Therefore, when hearing about unrevealed messages, the question we should ask is not just what was said, but what were the tangible effects on lives and communities? Because it is in the fruits that the veracity and usefulness of a revelation are often measured. In behind-the-scenes conversations, more complex hypotheses also emerge. Some people assume that certain messages were withheld because they contain operational instructions that could be misused if released recklessly. Others believe the silence is intended to protect a larger project of discernment, leaving room for the community to mature before receiving information that demands accountability. Some see this as a matter of timing. Revealing everything at once could provoke panic, while releasing slowly allows transformation to occur more sustainably. In all these scenarios, a recurring element emerges: the need for verification and clear criteria for accepting or rejecting messages. We cannot base our decisions solely on emotion. We also need consistent testimonies, coherence with basic Christian values, and signs that the message bears fruit of peace, love, and service. The rumor of the 7 messages also fuels a rich tapestry of personal stories that illustrate different facets of this mystery. There are accounts of people who claim to have received practical advice that helped them protect a family member in danger. Others tell of signs in the sky that united communities in prayer, and there are more ambiguous accounts, full of charm and doubt, that show how memories can transform over time. Analyzing these accounts requires sensitivity. It is necessary to separate what moves from what edifies, discern between effective memory and stable evidence, and always remember that true transformation manifests itself in concrete actions: forgiveness, more care, decisions that favor life. We also cannot ignore the role of institutions and the media in this enigma. When sensitive information circulates, the church, out of prudence, tends to calmly investigate. The media, in turn, can transform any hint into a headline that clouds the debate. This movement creates a field of tension in which the hidden truth risks being distorted or buried by excessive caution. And it is precisely at this point that the exercise of responsible analysis becomes essential: listening to witnesses, checking documents, contextualizing facts, and placing the search for clarity above the pursuit of audience. After all, the journey of faith and investigation is also an ethical journey. Decisions made in this area influence real lives. As we reflect on the possible reasons for the silence, we realize that the enigma of the 7 messages is not merely a theological curiosity. It reflects our own way of dealing with the unknown. Do we prefer ready-made truths, or are we willing to undertake the work of discerning, step by step, what nourishes and what destroys? The transformation these stories can bring about doesn't just occur at the emotional level. It translates into practical choices, a reorganization of priorities, and attitudes of care that have a real impact on daily life. Reflecting on the warnings, the calls to prayer, the veiled promises, also means considering how to respond responsibly, with empathy and with commitment. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, and that means listening to stories, confronting hypotheses, and, honestly, weighing consequences. Let's examine, with sensitive eyes and a focused mind, some of these narratives, not to judge simplistically, but to understand what each possible message could mean for the life of the recipient, for family, community, decision-making, and the formation of a mindset that prioritizes life and love. Comment: this makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. And, to make everything clearer and more practical, we'll group these 7 messages into 3 didactic blocks that help us understand not only what the stories suggest, but also how this could translate into concrete decisions in everyday life. The first block brings together the messages of warning and repentance. In 1 or 2 sentences, the stories indicate an urgent call to acknowledge mistakes, change moral course, and seek reconciliation. In practice, this translates into an inner transformation that begins with small decisions, such as asking for forgiveness, repairing relationships, and adjusting priorities. Imagine a family where a father, after a spiritual experience, decides to reduce his time spent at work to be more present with his children. Or a young person who, touched by a warning, stops self-destructive behavior and seeks help. These are simple actions, but they have a profound and lasting impact on family dynamics. This block speaks volumes to the conversion mindset. It's not just about feeling guilty, but about choosing concrete changes, a journey of responsibility that impacts financial, emotional, and spiritual choices. The second section, which encompasses public signs and family protection, suggests, in a brief summary, that some reports point to visible or collective manifestations, lights in the sky, events perceived by crowds accompanied by practical guidance to protect homes and communities. In everyday life, this means welcoming protocols, blessing rituals, and practical decisions for emotional and spiritual safety. Think of instructions like blessing the house on a specific date, gathering the family for regular prayers, or maintaining a routine of spiritual vigilance during times of stress. These may seem like small gestures, but when organized, they create a mindset of care that transforms habits and strengthens community bonds. In terms of impact, considering family protection isn't just superstition, it's adopting routines that promote presence, dialogue, and resilience, measures that reduce isolation, strengthen mental health, and clarify priorities when external pressures increase. The third section addresses the final promise and reconstruction. In a few lines, rumors suggest there would be a word of comfort or promise addressed to those who persevere, along with steps toward rebuilding after trials. In practice, this inspires hope-oriented decisions and community restoration projects. Imagine a promise that encourages people to invest in rebuilding, not just churches or sacred spaces, but also broken human bonds, social initiatives that serve the most vulnerable. That, consequently, shapes a new economy of care. The final promise, when understood in this way, acts as a catalyst for transformation. It shifts the collective mindset from victim to agent, from spectator to participant, and calls for choices that generate tangible effects in the social environment. These 3 blocks, placed together, form a map of action. First, the invitation to conversion that alters personal decisions. Second, the signs and guidance that organize protective practices and routines. Third, the promise that promotes reconstruction and social impact. However, between the lines of these clusters, there is always a hidden truth that demands attention. At every account is the same. Not every effect is beneficial, and not every practice suggested by witnesses withstands scrutiny of its fruits. Behind these narratives, there are memories, emotions, and contexts that shape interpretations. Therefore, understanding what each block truly means requires cross-referencing testimonies, observing consequences, and evaluating consistency with values that promote life and dignity. Real transformation, the kind that lasts over time, appears when decisions inspired by a message generate reconciliation, service to others, and emotional stability, not when they fuel fear or isolation. When discussing mindset and decisions, it's worth remembering that messages, real or hypothetically, operate on 2 levels, emotional and practical. On the emotional level, they provoke intimate conversations, revise memories, and shifts in meaning that reorient the heart. On the practical level, they lead to concrete choices about family, household finances, daily priorities, and even forms of community organization. For example, guidance to strengthen family prayer may seem exclusively spiritual, but its impact can extend to the creation of routines that improve communication between parents and children, reduce conflict, and promote greater psychological stability. Likewise, a public signal perceived by many can spur solidarity campaigns, support networks, and assistance programs that would, in fact, help protect people in vulnerable situations, which demonstrates that the reach of a message can be much more concrete than it seems at first glance. There are also nuances related to timing and the way revelations are communicated. Some theories advocate gradual disclosure to avoid panic. Others point to the need for criteria to discern authenticity. This discussion leads us to consider how the community should prepare, with practices that foster clarity and compassion, with structures that welcome those who report experiences without glamorizing suffering, and with methods that prioritize the common good over sensationalist curiosity. The transformation we wish to see is not just individual. It involves the reformulation of collective mindsets that decide to act with prudence, courage, and empathy in the face of the unknown. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, and that involves hearing accounts that show both the light and the shadows of these experiences, examining how decisions made after a supposed warning changed life trajectories and what the real impact was on families and communities. We'll understand how, sometimes, a simple word of warning can lead to a series of choices that save relationships or, conversely, to impulsive reactions that lead to rupture. I want to analyze how hidden truth, when brought to light responsibly, can promote restoration, and how, when handled recklessly, it can cause harm. These are difficult but necessary questions, because at stake is the quality of human decision-making in the face of mystery. Comment: that makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. And, to make everything clearer and more practical, we'll group these 7 messages into 3 didactic blocks that help us understand not only what the stories suggest, but also how this could translate into concrete decisions in everyday life. The first block brings together the messages of warning and repentance in 1 or 2 sentences. The stories indicate an urgent call to acknowledge mistakes, change moral course, and seek reconciliation. In practice, this translates into an inner transformation that begins with small decisions, such as asking for forgiveness, repairing relationships, and adjusting priorities. Imagine a family where a father, after a spiritual experience, decides to reduce his time spent at work to be more present with his children, or a young person who, touched by a warning, stops self-destructive behavior and seeks help. These are simple actions, but they have a profound and lasting impact on family dynamics. This block speaks volumes to the conversion mindset. It's not just about feeling guilty, but about choosing concrete changes, a journey of responsibility that impacts financial, emotional, and spiritual choices. The second section, which encompasses public signs and family protection, suggests, in a brief summary, that some reports point to visible or collective manifestations, lights in the sky, events perceived by crowds accompanied by practical guidance to protect homes and communities. In everyday life, this means welcoming protocols, blessing rituals, and practical decisions for emotional and spiritual safety. Think of instructions like blessing the house on a specific date, gathering the family for regular prayers, or maintaining a routine of spiritual vigilance during times of stress. These may seem like small gestures, but when organized, they create a mindset of care that transforms habits and strengthens community bonds. In terms of impact, considering family protection isn't just superstition, it's adopting routines that promote presence, dialogue, and resilience, measures that reduce isolation, strengthen mental health, and clarify priorities when external pressures increase. The third section addresses the final promise and reconstruction. In a few lines, rumors suggest there would be a word of comfort or promise addressed to those who persevere, along with steps toward rebuilding after trials. In practice, this inspires hope-oriented decisions and community restoration projects. Imagine a promise that encourages people to invest in rebuilding, not just churches or sacred spaces, but also broken human bonds, social initiatives that serve the most vulnerable, and that consequently shapes a new economy of care. The final promise, when understood in this way, acts as a catalyst for transformation. It shifts the collective mindset from victim to agent, from spectator to participant, and calls for choices that generate tangible effects in the social environment. These 3 blocks, placed together, form a map of action. First, the invitation to conversion that alters personal decisions. Second, the signs and guidance that organize protective practices and routines. Third, the promise that promotes reconstruction and social impact. However, between the lines of these clusters, there is always a hidden truth that demands attention. At every account is the same. Not every effect is beneficial, and not every practice suggested by witnesses withstands scrutiny of its fruits. Behind these narratives, there are memories, emotions, and contexts that shape interpretations. Therefore, understanding what each block truly means requires cross-referencing testimonies, observing consequences, and evaluating consistency with values that promote life and dignity. Real transformation, the kind that lasts over time, appears when decisions inspired by a message generate reconciliation, service to others, and emotional stability, not when they fuel fear or isolation. When discussing mindset and decisions, it's worth remembering that messages real or hypothetically operate on 2 levels, emotional and practical. On the emotional level, they provoke intimate conversations, revise memories, and shifts in meaning that reorient the heart. On the practical level, they lead to concrete choices about family, household finances, daily priorities, and even forms of community organization. For example, guidance to strengthen family prayer may seem exclusively spiritual, but its impact can extend to the creation of routines that improve communication between parents and children, reduce conflict, and promote greater psychological stability. Likewise, a public signal perceived by many can spur solidarity campaigns, support networks, and assistance programs that would, in fact, help protect people in vulnerable situations, which demonstrates that the reach of a message can be much more concrete than it seems at first glance. There are also nuances related to timing and the way revelations are communicated. Some theories advocate gradual disclosure to avoid panic. Others point to the need for criteria to discern authenticity. This discussion leads us to consider how the community should prepare, with practices that foster clarity and compassion, with structures that welcome those who report experiences without glamorizing suffering, and with methods that prioritize the common good over sensationalist curiosity. The transformation we wish to see is not just individual. It involves the reformulation of collective mindsets that decide to act with prudence, courage, and empathy in the face of the unknown. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And that involves hearing accounts that show both the light and the shadows of these experiences. Examining how decisions made after a supposed warning changed life trajectories and what the real impact was on families and communities. We'll understand how, sometimes, a simple word of warning can lead to a series of choices that save relationships or, conversely, to impulsive reactions that lead to rupture. I want to analyze how hidden truth, when brought to light responsibly, can promote restoration, and how, when handled recklessly, it can cause harm. These are difficult but necessary questions, because at stake is the quality of human decision-making in the face of mystery. Comment: that makes sense to me. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And when we talk about the Church's role in the face of phenomena like Medjugorje and the official silence surrounding certain messages, we enter a zone where faith meets institutional responsibility and where decisions made behind the scenes have a direct impact on the lives of entire communities. This stance must be viewed with empathy. Religious institutions are not cold monoliths. They are organizations made up of people who bear the burden of guiding vulnerable communities, safeguarding the truth, and preventing psychological and social harm. Therefore, silence often arises from the combination of discernment and pastoral prudence, two concepts that may seem technical, but which, in practice, mean gently touching the wounds of others, protecting families from emotional injunctions, and preventing misinterpreted revelations from causing panic, division, or exploitation. A respectful hypothesis to explain why certain messages remain hidden is precisely that of verification. The Church has historically required criteria to validate private experiences. This involves hearing witnesses, evaluating doctrinal coherencia, monitoring spiritual fruits, and observing whether the messages promote peace, charity, and genuine conversion. There is a method that combines human science and spirituality: interviews, psychological counseling when necessary, verification of dates and facts, analysis of possible public signs, and, above all, observation of the fruits over time. This search for evidence is not sterile skepticism. It is a way to protect God's people from manipulation and self-confessions that can do more harm than good. Hidden truth, if it exists, must survive scrutiny because revelations that do not stand the test of time tend to produce a negative impact, foster fear, and diminish trust in institutions. Another plausible reason is pastoral prudence. Pastors and bishops have a responsibility to discern the right moment to make public information that could provoke mass reactions. Revealing something sensitive without preparation can trigger mass hysteria, fraud, and even family breakdowns. Prudence, in this sense, functions as a transmission belt between the sacred and the human. It is a way of managing timing, of building a welcoming infrastructure for those who share experiences, and of articulating responses that prioritize the common good. When a community is still fragile due to conflicts, economic crises, or internal divisions, hasty disclosure can exacerbate wounds. Thus, silence can, paradoxically, be a gesture of care. There is also the diplomatic and institutional layer. Messages that touch on social, political, or even ecumenical issues can have repercussions beyond the immediate religious sphere. Church authorities weigh the effects of widespread dissemination in international contexts, on interreligious relations, and even on peace processes or regional tensions. In situations like Medjugorje, which arose in a time and place marked by conflict, pastoral diplomacy considers not only the content of the message, but also its potential to influence collective decisions, mobilize movements, and alter the social fabric. This approach, sometimes criticized as slow, seeks to avoid unforeseen consequences that could harm innocent people. Furthermore, there is a legitimate concern for the protection of those who report their experiences. Witnesses can be vulnerable individuals, subject to public pressure, media exploitation, or harassment. Keeping certain information confidential can be a way to protect identities, allow for healing processes, and offer appropriate support before accounts are exposed to public scrutiny. This concern for the human person, for their dignity and vulnerability, is an aspect often overlooked when absolute transparency is demanded without considering the human cost of hasty disclosure. All of this creates a tension that demands balance between transparency and confidentiality, between public curiosity and pastoral protection, between the pursuit of revelations and the responsibility to do no harm. This is why, in communities, institutional silence can generate frustration, conspiracy theories, and feelings of exclusion. On the other hand, irresponsible disclosure can lead to manipulation, scandals, and profound ruptures. The practical question that arises is, how to reconcile the legitimate desire to know with the need to proceed with caution. Part of the answer lies in pastoral common sense, prolonged listening, the development of clear evaluation criteria, and the promotion of a mindset that prioritizes concrete results: more forgiveness, more service, more care over sensationalism. It's also important to recognize that the church's role is not to suppress the search for truth, but to guide it. Religious institutions have protocols, theological councils, and research structures for a reason, to ensure that, when dealing with the inexplicable, the community is guided by criteria that prevent abuse and promote the common good. When the church asks for time, it is often seeking to consolidate testimonies, engage with experts, and prepare a reception system capable of dealing with the consequences of any disclosure. This is part of an ethical journey that places the human person at the center of decisions, not the spectacle. Naturally, there are legitimate criticisms of this stance. Some point out that silence can be used to control narratives, avoid institutional embarrassment, or protect interests. These criticisms deserve to be heard and confronted with transparency whenever possible. What we propose here is a balanced approach, accepting that there are real risks in disclosing without criteria, but also demanding that the process of institutional discernment be accompanied by responsibility and accountability. To the extent possible, trust between believers and authorities is built when decisions are explained clearly, and when evaluation criteria are presented honestly. Ultimately, the question is human. How do we organize our search for truth so that it produces transformation, not destruction? How do we make decisions that respect the need for clarification while preserving the dignity and peace of those involved? These questions invite us to adopt a mature stance, cultivating patience, demanding discernment, valuing impact, and, above all, prioritizing people's lives. When an institution acts prudently, it does so not out of fear of the truth, but out of responsibility for the impact that each revelation can have on the collective journey. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic, and to do so, we'll hear stories that demonstrate both the protective effects and the adverse consequences of silence and disclosure. We'll analyze decisions made by leaders and note how these choices shape the mindset of entire communities, transforming routines, priorities, and relationships. With this, we'll better understand the ethical and practical limits of disclosing or withholding sensitive information, always seeking a truth that generates life, not confusion. Comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject, and removing the mystery of theories and speculation, it's worth asking honestly, what does all this really change in the lives of those who hear, believe, or simply observe? The practical answer begins with a change in mindset, not a sudden or spectacular transformation, but a calm and determined reordering of everyday decisions. When someone receives a message, true or not, the essential thing is to see if it bears fruit. Greater presence at home, more care for others, attitudes that promote peace instead of panic. From this simple idea, we can design practices applicable today, without alarmism, that function as instruments of inner preparation and concrete protection for the family and community. The first step is to resume a prayer routine in a way that is maintainable. I'm not talking about long vigils that require special skills. I'm talking about short, repeatable practices, 5 minutes upon waking to center the heart, a prayer of thanksgiving before meals, a moment in the evening to review the day and ask for guidance in decisions. These gestures are not merely symbolic. They have a psychological and spiritual impact. They reduce anxiety, strengthen bonds, and help create a mindset of benevolent vigilance. If one of the messages suggests intense prayer as protection, the practical application is to begin with habits that are sustainable over time. Transformation occurs through repetition, not through isolated gestures. Another accessible practice is the house blessing. Instead of seeing it as superstition, consider it a community ritual with a therapeutic function, bringing the family together. Speaking words of intention, remembering commitments to one another, and establishing signs of care. A blessing can be as simple as lighting a candle with the intention of peace, going through each room, asking for protection for each person who lives there, and agreeing on a small routine of mutual support. In times of crisis, this routine creates a culture of family protection that, in practice, translates into concrete decisions, checking children's messages, having a contact plan in emergencies, cultivating regular conversations that allow you to notice mood changes or signs of distress. Spiritual discernment is also a practical skill that can be learned. Instead of accepting accounts at face value, we can develop clear criteria, verifying consistency with principles of love and charity. observing fruit in the lives of those reporting the experience, checking dates and witnesses, and avoiding hasty conclusions. Creating a small homemade protocol for discernment, writing down the account, recording the observed consequences. Seeking advice from someone trustworthy helps transform a confusing experience into an opportunity for growth. This reduces the risk of impulsive decisions and protects the community from interpretations that fuel fear rather than hope. At the community level, it's possible to foster support groups that function as emotional and practical safety nets. Instead of centralizing the entire experience into isolated episodes, organize prayer meetings, listening circles, and service initiatives. When a community comes together to help the most vulnerable, the messages, regardless of their origin, become mediated by concrete actions, material aid, psychological support, visits to the sick, dialogue between generations. This is the real impact that transforms emotion into service and transforms stories into shared responsibility. Inner preparedness also includes practical education on how to manage resources and decisions in times of uncertainty. No financial panic, but prudent decisions, having a minimum reserve, organizing important documents, establishing trustworthy contacts, and arranging meeting points. These measures have a direct impact on the sense of security and the ability to respond calmly. Spirituality, when integrated into daily management, produces more balanced choices. Someone who prays and also has a concrete plan for caring for their children tends to respond better to any difficulties that arise. There's also the dimension of listening, learning to hear stories with empathy, without turning each story into dogma. This involves welcoming those who suffer, offering attention without sensationalism, and referring them to professional support when necessary. Transformation often involves small human decisions, taking someone to the doctor, talking to a neighbor, interceding for a family in difficulty, which combined generate a significant impact. The journey of faith isn't limited to spectacular signs. It unfolds in the subtleties of everyday care, in the context of disclosures and ethical issues. It's worth cultivating personal transparency, writing down experiences, keeping a journal, recording dates and details that allow you to assess over time whether something generated positive change. This habit helps separate effective memory from hard evidence and creates a more solid foundation for any future conversations with leaders or colleagues. Behind the scenes, these records serve as a tool for those who seek truth responsibly. They reveal patterns, results, and consequences, and help avoid hasty conclusions. It's also helpful to establish small, psychological protection practices. Limit exposure to sensationalist content, seek out reliable sources, talk to trusted people, and avoid becoming isolated in extreme interpretations. The impact of rumors and exaggerated headlines is real and can lead to impulsive decisions. Protecting one's own mind is an act of prudence and love. The mindset we cultivate, one of calm, discernment, and a focus on the common good, is perhaps the most powerful tool for dealing with any kind of revelation. Finally, there's the decision to invest in fraternity, creating bonds that resist fear and prioritize mutual care. Small decisions, inviting a neighbor to dinner, offering help to an elderly person on the street, participating in a community outreach program for those in need, turn rumors into concrete action. When a community decides to act in this way, the result is a safer, more resilient environment, more likely to yield positive results, regardless of the ultimate veracity of the messages. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic and continue to unfold these practices into real life examples, showing how, in concrete situations, small decisions changed trajectories and brought about restoration. The idea is simple: transform restlessness into planning, mystery into responsible action, and curiosity into a journey of care that produces impact. Comment below. I'm on this journey too. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. And, for us to responsibly separate truth from exaggeration and manipulation, we need clear criteria that act as a compass on the journey of discernment. Discernment isn't about closing our eyes to mystery or embracing cold reason. It's about finding a balance between sensitivity and method, between acceptance and verification. The first criterion that always seems central to me is that of fruits. A message, be it an inner experience, a vision, or a report of a public sign, should be evaluated by the impact it has on people's lives. If something transforms hearts into actions of love, reconciles families, motivates service to the poor, and generates inner peace, it tends to have greater practical credibility. Transformation and charity are often strong indicators that an experience is aligned with good. On the other hand, if the immediate result is fear, confusion, hatred, division, or personal gain for some, this requires caution. Observing the fruits is a moral and practical exercise. Asking yourself how decisions changed after that experience helps you understand whether there was something there that built or destroyed. Second, doctrinal and ethical coherence matters. Not every moving revelation is consistent with the core teachings of faith or with basic human values of dignity and respect. Therefore, it is legitimate to check whether the content of the account is in line with principles that promote life, truth, and service. When a supposed message contradicts fundamental teachings, encourages practices that violate rights, or promotes exclusion, we must raise the flag of prudence. Coherence does not mean accepting everything the religious system says without question, but neither does it mean relativizing ethical truths. The practical mindset of those seeking discernment must consider whether the message promotes compassion, justice, and responsibility, and is not limited to arousing curiosity. A third criterion is the verifiability of witnesses and the consistency of accounts over time. Verifiable testimonies, with multiple independent sources, with recorded dates, and with recognizable people who do not radically change their versions with each retelling, carry greater weight. This also includes the possibility of documentation, records, diaries, notes taken at the time, official communications, reliable eyewitnesses. Investigating behind the scenes of history requires this kind of care. Asking for concrete evidence is not a lack of faith. It is zeal for truth and the common good. It is also wise to observe whether the account evolves coherently, whether the essential details remain the same, and whether the narrator assumes concrete consequences, for example, life changes or acts of reparation that corroborate the seriousness of the experience. Another fundamental aspect is caution in the face of sensationalism and the attention market. Nowadays, news, videos, and rumors spread quickly and often for commercial or personal gain. Asking who benefits from the dissemination of a certain story is a legitimate question. There are cases where media exploitation transforms painful accounts into profitable content, and this taints any honest assessment. Therefore, evaluating intentions and economic or media contexts is part of discernment. A message presented urgently, and without criteria, accompanied by incessant requests for money or followers, deserves suspicion. The hidden truth, if it exists, doesn't need a microphone to prove itself. It withstands time and scrutiny. It's also worth considering the psychological and social health of witnesses. Intense experiences can be marked by trauma, collective stress, vivid dreams, or psychological phenomena that alter perception. This doesn't automatically invalidate the experience, but it requires caution, involving mental health professionals and trusted individuals to monitor. Reports helps distinguish what may have an emotional origin from something with lasting spiritual effects. Discerning includes looking at the human and social context, to understanding who the people are, what tensions they experience, and whether there are family or community pressures that may influence narratives. To help viewers apply these criteria, I propose some concrete questions that can be asked before accepting a revelation. As a decision-making tool, what is the immediate impact of this message on people's lives? Does it promote love, reconciliation, and service, or does it generate fear and division? Is the message consistent with ethical and religious principles that prioritize life and human dignity? Are there independent witnesses and verifiable records to support the account? Are there signs of media or financial or personal exploitation surrounding the disclosure? What trusted professionals or leaders can be consulted to evaluate the case with a balanced approach? These questions do not negate the openness to the mystery, but rather structure a safe path to transforming unease into responsible decision-making. Another practical question is, what concrete changes does this message ask of me today? If the answer involves actions that promote good praying, more forgiving, helping others, organizing the family, that's a good sign. If, on the other hand, the answer involves extreme measures, isolation, public outcry, or requests for money, it's necessary to slow down and consider. Discerning also means assessing the proportionality of decisions. The faith that protects does not abandon reason. Prudent action coexists with care for the physical, psychological, and financial health of those involved in the institutional sphere. It is essential to seek sources that offer transparency and criteria, asking what verification procedures are being used, whether there has been pastoral support, whether documents are available, and whether the responsible community addresses the issue seriously and responsibly is part of the process. Demanding clarity is not disrespectful of faith. It is safeguarding the integrity of the community and people's lives. Trust is built through open dialogue between lay people, leaders, and experts, not through absolute silence or uncritical acceptance. Finally, cultivating a mindset of humility and patience is perhaps the criterion that unites all of the above. Not every question will have an immediate answer. Not every pronouncement will come with instant clarity. Hidden truth, when it reveals itself, usually does so in a timely manner and in ways that respect the human condition. Meanwhile, the decisions we make today, to forgive, serve, protect, educate, can be measured and evaluated by their fruits. This practical and effective care is what transforms curiosity into responsibility and mystery into positive change. Now, I want to delve even deeper into this topic, and from now on, I'll apply these criteria to specific reports. Showing how to conduct this investigative work with empathy and method, always considering the real impact on the lives involved. Comment below. That makes sense to me. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. If there are 7 unrevealed messages, they call us to something essential: choice, responsibility, and vigilance, and this simple statement sums up the practical nature of what we've seen so far. It's not just curiosity about signs in the sky, but a call to decisions that shape lives and communities. As we briefly recap, realize that the choice here is twofold. Choosing to believe without criteria can lead to fanaticism. Choosing to ignore out of convenience can deprive us of real opportunities for transformation. Therefore, responsibility is the first principal: responsibility for ourselves, for our families, and for how we react to the inexplicable. Vigilance, in turn, is not synonymous with fear, but with mature attention, monitoring our own motivations, monitoring the fruits that certain narratives produce, and monitoring how institutions and leaders handle sensitive information. This trio: choice, responsibility, and vigilance, is the thread that weaves together all the stories we hear and guides us to act with prudence and love. Thinking of these messages as a call to choice helps us understand the real impact they can have. A decision made peacefully and with discernment can reconcile a family. A decision made in the heat of sensationalism can destroy a reputation. When we talk about responsibility, we also talk about practical ethics, asking who benefits from disclosure, who is vulnerable when faced with a report, what structures exist to welcome and protect witnesses. These are decisions that require a mindset of care, not just emotion. And when I speak of vigilance, I'm talking about an active stance of those who neither abandon reason nor renounce faith, but learn to integrate both into choices that promote life and dignity. Throughout this investigative journey, we observed a sequence of scenes that repeated themselves behind the scenes. Someone who had an intense experience, the immediate repercussions in close circles, the arrival of curious onlookers, and the possibility of media exploitation, followed by institutional intervention that seeks to evaluate, protect, and, if necessary, guide. Each of these moments demands decisions. Will there be pastoral care? Will there be psychological counseling? Will there be public evaluation criteria? The answers to these questions shape the impact of the messages and show us that hidden truth, when it exists, only finds its healthy place if inserted into a process that prioritizes human well-being. This is the point of greatest responsibility. Revelation is not enough. Structure is needed to transform discourse into constructive practice. When confronted with reports that speak of warnings or final promises, our practical response must combine a spiritual attitude and concrete action. My point is simple. Fasting and prayer can go hand in hand with community support plans. Prayers of protection can coexist with protocols for emotional and social security. Promises of reconstruction must be accompanied by real assistance projects. This integration of spirituality and action is what prevents mystery from becoming a spectacle or faith from becoming mere escapism. Lasting transformation happens when moving words generate tangible changes in the way we raise our children, in the way we organize support networks for vulnerable people, in the economic choices that make a family more resilient. Furthermore, it's important to always remember that honest investigation into these reports must be conducted with intellectual humility and human sensitivity, listening without automatically validating, verifying without principled discrediting, and welcoming without glamorizing suffering. There's an ethical balance that involves recognizing the dignity of those reporting, considering the social consequences of disclosure, and demanding criteria when transforming a private phenomenon into a public narrative. Institutions and leaders are partners in this process when they open clear channels of dialogue, are accountable for their actions, and prioritize the common good over the rush for news. This approach builds trust and allows the truth, whatever it may be, to find a space that promotes healing and restoration. The personal dimension of this journey cannot be underestimated either. Each of us responds to the mystery with a unique baggage of wounds, hopes, and choices. Therefore, the transformation expected by a supposed message often takes place in small, consistent actions. Visiting a distant relative, forgiving an emotional debt, reorganizing a routine to be more present, establishing family prayer practices that strengthen bonds. These decisions, made daily, are often more decisive than any light show in the sky, because they act at the foundation of human relationships and produce lasting effects on people's emotional and spiritual health. And we cannot forget the role of the community. When a group organizes to respond to a call, whether interpreted as a revelation or not, the impact multiplies. Solidarity networks, listening circles, psychological support initiatives, and material assistance programs are concrete ways to transform concern into benevolent action. The message, therefore, only becomes truly useful when it leads to choices that promote the common good, not when it fuels fear or personal gain. This is the parameter that ultimately guides us, evaluating not only the veracity but also the transformative effect and moral coherence of the responses we give. Now I want to delve even deeper into this topic. And before we move on, I want to close this moment with a central idea. If there's a riddle in the 7 messages, it requires more courage to act well than curiosity to see the spectacle. And if this topic touched you in any way, tell me in the comments. Have you ever felt a sign or seen something inexplicable? Right, I saw something, or I want to know more. I'll read and respond. And these stories will fuel our investigation with humanity and responsibility. If you've made it this far, thank you for walking with me through this topic that deserves care and sensitivity. If you felt this content brought clarity or raised new questions, consider subscribing to the channel. This helps me continue bringing serious investigations, interviews, and reports full of responsibility and practical value to your journey. If any part touched you, leave a discreet like. It's a sign that this type of conversation deserves further exploration. Write the phrase, "I'm with you until the end," in the comments. If you've watched so far, I read every message, and many of these responses become starting points for future videos. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click it and stay with me there so we can continue uncovering testimonies, behind-the-scenes stories, and revelations with balance and empathy. Thank you for being here. We're in this together.